bit conscious that two things will happen now. I used to be obviously covering the courts on a day-to-day basis. I'm not doing that anymore. And I don't want it to feel like I'm punching at the, the media anymore. But I think there's and I'll try to make this as nuanced as possible. One of the things which has happened is I was in the middle of doing this for several years. Now I've stepped away from doing the day-to-day coverage. So I've got a slightly different also view on how the media has been covering these issues. And I think the first very basic thing looking at the media coverage of this kind of issue as a whole is that it is very slipshod. There's not a lot of joined up thinking about it. From time to time, you'll get a great series from Jyoti. You'll get Apurva directly asking DYC at an event what's going on with, like, why didn't you appoint more women judges? Trying to like really get that kind of answer. But is there a larger, better, sort of understood campaign to do this? Or, actually, campaign's the wrong word. Like, is there a proper sense of reportage and coverage of this? Something consistent, something planned, serious? I'm not entirely sure. I think from time to time you will find individual journalists, you'll find individual media houses maybe doing that. But as a whole, it's not quite there. Now, there are a lot of challenges behind this, and I can understand why that can happen. For digital media outlets, it's a little bit difficult because you have to look at things which are going to make sure, you have to look at engagement, you have to look at those kind of issues. So, if you're going to do a story which is, this third follow-up on a particular issue, it can sometimes be very tough to do that. For newspapers, I mean, it could be an issue of constraint of space. The ones who have it easiest are the TV channels, who will obviously do the worst job of this, which I think pretty much any time you try to look at this and see who's done a good job, you will not find a TV channel doing it. Even though they're the ones who actually have they actually have the easiest capacity to do it, but they won't. Now it's important to remember this because I do want to pick up what the media should be doing next, and then that's something where looking at the nature of different kinds of media becomes very important there. But yeah, just to go back to what I think are the problems with why there isn't a joined up thinking is that you would otherwise have, a situation where every time a CGI retires, that's the only point when we're really looking at, okay, what was their appointments track record? Shouldn't we have been doing this earlier, every time a collegium resolution was put out or every time an appointment happened? Sometimes it happened, sometimes it didn't. It wasn't a consistent thing. When it was asked the question, I think a lot of the media would almost do it as they're trying to do like a tick box exercise and, oh, these are the questions we need to examine and stuff. Was it being done by them when they really, have they really thought about this as an issue and wanted to cover this in a nuanced, sensible way? Not really. It was often, I think, this is something which I think, and I'll even say that I was guilty of this in the past, that I also didn't do this. I didn't think about these questions a lot. One of the times where this came up, where it was very interesting, was when you had during Justice Ramana's tenure, when three women appointed on the same day. Obviously a great moment in a certain way. But there was very little self-reflection around that. And there really should have been to the point that, okay, it's great that we have 3 judges right now who have been appointed, but why is it now that there are only still 4 in the whole court? I mean, 3 judges being appointed should have meant that you now had a really nice number of women judges at the court, but you didn't have that. That discussion was very lacking, I felt, in the media. I mean, you had the odd person raise it. We ran a story by someone, I think Express and other places also would have had 1 or 2 bits, but was there a thing where we looked at it and said, okay, we've talked about this now, are we going to then follow it up? And I know I didn't do it as well. Because we wrote this thing saying, look, it's great this has happened, but what about the fact that your numbers are still really low? But we didn't then go and chase up during Bobde's tenure. We weren't asking those questions that, okay, every time something's happening, what's going on? Of course, the fact that Bobde's appointments was a mess can be argued to be a mitigating factor. But I think, asking those questions is something which the media needs to do better. Those who are doing it are also, maybe need to start thinking about it in a slightly more long-term way, which is where, things like what Jyoti is talking about here, right, is important, because it's good to see that there are journalists thinking about that, and that's obviously important. But the problem is, this is where it comes to the different kinds of media which you've got to deal with. Jyoti doing it is important, but if the big mainstream newspapers are not picking it up, if the TV channels aren't picking it up, it will always then end up being, something which gets covered, it gets a lot of attention, it leads to even the right people looking at it. But it has to stay in public eye for it to be something which can truly be pushed to achieve that thing. Because otherwise, you'll have a short-term announcement made, something will be done, one part of the problem will be fixed, but the larger holistic issue is not going to be dealt with. So I mean, like some of the other issues were like, even when we look at the DYC situation, because he was an easy target, let's say, because he kept saying it. And I think that's also, I mean, it also meant he had a greater responsibility to do something. But finally, the only person who really outright asked him the question and did it in an active way was Apurva. And I mean, if you now try to search and see on the media who's criticized him, who really looked at it, the only articles which come up are like Jaina's and others on Supreme Court Observer. You actually won't find a detailed thing. You'll find DYC's comments, you'll find other things, and sure, some of that is search algorithm issues. But there wasn't enough. And for instance, like I work for an organization which does fact checking. We could have perhaps done more as well, right? Like when DYC comes and says, oh, there weren't enough women judges, senior enough. I mean, that's not true. I mean, there were two ways to look at it. And I think, and luckily we had a great panel looking at data-driven stuff yesterday. And I asked them this question, and even they said, look, the numbers don't bear it out. Even assuming you have a small pool, and which is understandable, there is the fact that you can appoint people from the bar directly. Are you really telling us that during the last 2 years, there were no women lawyers who were eligible to be appointed by the bar? So, I mean, that kind of sort of rebuttal to those questions, perhaps, the rest of us should have also been doing more. And I think this is what we have to understand as the media across different segments is, to the extent you can, you need to do what you can, but to make sure that you can actually achieve that and be effective means having a proper joined up plan where you understand that. And I think that's where it's, again, I guess one of the issues is at the end, the newsrooms also are still, even though we have a lot of women senior editors and people as well, at the end of the day, a lot of the editorial thinking is still dominated again by men, right? So that is why this is viewed as this is a women's issue or like a part issue, which is one of the questions you ask. It's not a crucial core question you need to ask about the judiciary, about CGIs, about other people. I think, one very important point which was also raised at the last session by Dr. Anganusia is that why do we only look at the CGI's tenures when we're looking at this question? Should be looked at every time any member who's part of the collegium retires, ask the question what's going on. The judges who are there, what did they do? How did they go about it? So I think these are questions, and so there's a lot the media can do. It's about having a plan in your head to kind of do it, and I think that's something which which can be worked on, and different kinds of media can make sure they do it. As I said, as a fact-checking organization, we should be looking at what's being said, and keeping an eye on it on a regular basis to be able to come up with regular, sort of consistent coverage about it. Digital media organizations have the freedom to they're more independent, they can do sort of very punchy, powerful stories. But then, newspapers and TV channels should be looking to then do that more consistent, regular coverage, which they can do without having to worry about is it tied directly to a news cycle? So I think there's a lot of things the media needs to I mean, we've got it wrong, I think, in the past, and we need to be doing better. Luckily, we have people like Jyoti and Apurva who hopefully will mean that that is the case. The other point which I wanted to raise, and I'll try to do this quickly so that we can obviously take some questions and things, is that when we're looking at what comes next now and what should the media, how should we be trying to cover this? How do we try to use all the different facets of media to make this, to address this problem? I think one thing which the media has to keep in mind is the sort of, there's a new kind of, I don't know how to describe this. Okay, so the thing is, we are seeing online, when we've talked about brigading efforts, or we've talked about coordinated behavior, when we've talked about, the kind of trolling, things like that, in terms of it being an organized, systematic thing, we've only looked at it in terms of hate speech, in terms of very political rhetoric, that kind of stuff. When it comes to backlash or comments about women, we tend to look at it as, it's just, people being misogynistic and people being patriarchal or whatever. They're viewed as, okay, this is like bad behavior, but it's like sort of what comes within society. It's not it's not considered to be coordinated or planned. What we are seeing increasingly over the last few years, and particularly over the last year itself, you'll see even more of this, is there is a there's a set of coordinated campaigns to push back on gender empowerment, push back on gender justice, gender rights. This is, I mean, there's a lot of different political factors at play. You see this is being pushed, in fact, a lot on social media by people like Elon Musk and stuff, because that suits a particular kind of US narrative. That's also having its impacts here. And of course, India has been a Vishwaguru in this. Even on this point, we've had coordinated attacks relating to this issue before. And funnily enough, the person who faced the brunt of this was Justice Chandrachud. Before he became CJI, there was a very dedicated campaign talking about not my CGI, and the whole focus was all his judgments about gender empowerment. Now, this started off as a bunch of, this particular space online, which was the sort of men's rights movements and all, and there's a few particular offenders in that space. But if it had just stayed there, you could still use the old thinking about it and be like, yeah, okay, cool, it was just, you have these people who will always make these points. It's not a coordinated, larger, bigger problem. But what was interesting was, and there's a study by Dr. Joyjit Pal from the University of Michigan on this, was that it then got picked up by the sort of larger right-wing ecosystem and the larger right-wing influencer ecosystem. And then that was used to boost it, to make it become further. And that was an example of this kind of problem, that there are a lot of people for whom this sort of anti-women rhetoric, anti-empowerment rhetoric, now in the US it's all the DEI, anti-DEI kind of stuff. There is a lot of political movements which like to use that. It's not necessarily that this is something that's a core plank of their thing, but it helps them with the kind of anger they want to spread in society, with the kind of reactionary behavior they want to inspire in society. This is something which is very important for the media to recognize and understand. So when you're then reporting on what's going on in this space, you need to realize that that these are coordinated campaigns. These are intentional campaigns meant to push back on women's rights. And that is very, very important to understand. So, and I think so for instance, when the Joyjit Pal thing happened, because it was still a single case, I think this larger understanding didn't come forward. But now that we've seen these anti-women's empowerment sort of campaigns happen more and more online, that's something which has to be done. Jyoti pointed this out, right? The Atul Subhash case. You saw that again immediately. So it starts with, again, this right-wing, it starts with the manosphere men's rights activists, and then it just gets co-opted further and further into people who have even more influence and reach. That's something which we need to keep an eye out on, and which we need to really actively push back on, because we're in a situation where a lot of, you can say, I think there was a time when it was easy to say, okay, we have made progress incrementally on gender rights, and so we're going in the right direction. But a lot of these movements online are trying to take us back. They're trying to go for regression, for retrogression. That is something which needs to be actively called out and dealt with by sections of the media who are still responsible and who are still looking at this sensibly.